Devices encourage us to be passive. We can very easily get sucked in and locked in. Rather than doing that mindlessly, do it mindfully.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the HSE Talking Health and Wellbeing podcast. My name is Fergal Fox, and today we're talking about screen time in the context of parenting and young children. Now, this is an issue which many parents are increasingly concerned about, and it causes issues in many families. And we in the HSE are becoming increasingly aware of the impact of screen time on health and well-being. So we'll be sharing some useful tips for parents today, and our guests will share their learning and insights about this area. First of all, thanks again for tuning into our podcast. Please share this episode with a friend or a group that you think will share your concern on these issues raised and could benefit from the advice. If you'd like more information about HSE Health and Wellbeing, have a look at our website, hse.ie/health and wellbeing. Follow us on X and take a look at the HSE Health and Wellbeing YouTube channel. And if you want to register for our e-zine, you can email us at healthandwellbeing.communications@hse.ie. So to our guest today, I'd like to welcome Dr. Jillian Doyle, Senior Clinical Psychologist in the Rotunda National Maternity Hospital, and Dr. Anne-Marie Casey, Senior Clinical Psychologist with Children's Health Ireland Crumlin. You're very welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Fergal.
Thank you.
So, screen time. What are we actually talking about here when we talk about screen time? It does seem to encompass a lot of different things, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. So a screen is any sort of device with a screen.
Yeah.
So we're talking about TVs, smartphones, tablets, computers, different sorts of gaming devices, but anything where our attention is locked on to a screen.
Yeah, I think sometimes, or certainly it was become a bit of a confusing term in one way. Like screen time does seem very obvious, screen, but social media was used interchangeably with screen time as if it was the same thing, but it's not. Like screen time is that kind of broader, it encompasses maybe getting swallowed up in social media, but it encompasses all those other pieces as well. The gaming piece, that's not new, is it? Like that gaming has been around for a while, but it does seem to be something that we're kind of reminded of now in that context of broader screen time concerns. But it's still there, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. I think gaming is still something we think about and talk about. And I suppose the issue nowadays is maybe that people have games at their fingertips. Games are, in your mobile phone, because a mobile phone is more like a mobile computer nowadays. Whereas maybe in the past we were thinking about someone being up in their bedroom playing a game. But certainly I do think that we are kind of thinking a lot more about, social media nowadays and the impact of that.
Yeah, when you say that, the phones, and it's got so much, it offers us so much, Anne-Marie, doesn't it? Like it's a really convenient tool that perhaps we should step back from our concerns about children first and look at screen time for us all, that it is a reality of our lives, isn't it?
Well, this is it, Fergal. I guess screen time is everybody's business.
Yeah.
It isn't just children, adolescents. We're actually thinking about parental smartphone use as well. And just like you said previously, if I picked up the phone to ring you, as soon as I would finish ringing you, I would have no other use for that device. Whereas now with smartphones, once I've finished talking to you, I can check the weather, I can look up my recipe, I can do my banking, I can sort my kids, activities out, I can answer emails. So you've literally got the world at your fingertips, as well as the potential for scrolling, as well as the potential for finding yourself down a rabbit hole of kind of exploring what else.
Yeah, I think the rabbit hole is a good description of it, or you get into any little trench about any topic and your internet's at your fingertips and it's all there, whether you have the apps or whether you're just on search engines. It's just, there's nearly too much information at our fingertips.
Absolutely. And it's very hard to pull back from it or to put it away. But as Anne-Marie says, it's such an important device. There is no going back.
Yeah. Maybe phone is not a good name for it anymore.
Yeah, maybe it's a mobile computer. I think if I was thinking that when we were researching this topic, if we could change it to a mobile computer, it might actually change some of our behaviours, because certainly, when phones first came out, as Anne-Marie said, it was very different. Whereas now they are such an important part of our life, for good and for ill.
Yeah, I see it even from a marketing perspective, and even our own, like we're trying to communicate and engage people, and we're asking people to, like and follow us here and there and everywhere, so that people are getting notifications on their phone, and it's such an immediate attention grabbing thing, that people have their phones, and everybody that's selling is using apps that we all use and using those smart devices, it has become, as you said, we're no going back is a good term, I say. So.
No going back. And actually, I was reading research looking at the kind of evolutionary psychology viewpoint of devices. And if you think about a smartphone, it's 8 or 10 inches from your face.
Yeah.
And at no other time in human development were we so engaged with something so close to us. We have survived as a species by looking around us, by, engaging in the full world. Whereas, when we're engaged in a device, it's almost impossible to be fully alert around us. And I guess, it really beggars kind of belief to think that we wouldn't bring awareness to what this is doing to us.
Yeah. That's funny that you mentioned that, because I often end up telling my kids, like, get off your phone. You just look around, even when they're in the car. Mm-hmm. Get off the phone there and just look out the window and, be bored for a minute or try to, because it's just, as you said, it's so attention grabbing. So we need to bring attention to this attention grabbing device that we all have access to in a potentially harming way to our health and well-being.
And I think just the other thing, it's not just attention grabbing, it's incredibly rewarding. And, as we engage with our phone, all of the pleasure centers of our brain are switching on. And that's why we can't disengage from our phone, and not just the pleasure centers, but also the threat centers. And that's one of the ways that social media really grabs our attention, and particularly around young people. Things like, well, if a post I put up doesn't get a like, all of a sudden anxiety is switching on. Right. Whereas if a post you put up does get a like, you're getting a nice little dopamine hit, and that feels really good. And so we want to do more of the thing that makes us feel good and less of the thing that makes us feel bad. And so we want to plug in.
Yeah, so it's really cleverly designed to give you that little feedback, as you say, that dopamine feedback, and keep you hooked.
Yes.
And we all know these apps, like, you're talking about your Facebooks, your Instagrams, your TikToks, your whatever you have yourself. So it is evasive, isn't it? It's all around us.
Yeah.
You mentioned the research there. Is there anything else, like you two guys are working in taking a closer look at this area? What's the research kind of telling you, other than the things that you mentioned already?
Well, the research actually has a name now. It's called technoference, and it's looking to see how are devices interrupting daily life. Research is showing that, we can spend as much as 3 to 6 hours a day and can pick up our devices 50 to 60 times a day. There's also research emerging in England. It was a cohort of 500 adults to show that people are using their phones 11 hours a day, with an additional 3 hours with TVs and other gaming. So if you think about 14 hours a day and how much awake time you have, how is it interrupting your daily activities? There's a lot of research coming out on parental smartphone use and its impact on attachment, its impact on the first 1,000 days of a little infant and toddler's life in terms of their attuned caregiving, that sensitivity at that time of development where you need the external environment, you need the sense of attunement of your caregivers to watch and give back what consistent caregiving you need.
Yeah, don't move away from that now. That is absolutely enormous, isn't it? So the technoference, I love that term. That's great. I think that's going to grow in terms of awareness. I've never heard that term before. The issue that you mentioned then about the engagement with the first 1,000 days, and I suppose it's been able to read somebody's face, isn't it? And the eyes, and that if you're giving attention to something else, isn't it?
And it's interesting because when Anne-Marie was talking about the distance you hold your phone from your face, and through evolution we've evolved to look around, there's one instance where that isn't the case, and that's with a baby. Because actually, generally, if someone is holding a baby, they're holding the baby at the same distance from their face as they hold their phone. If you're cradling a baby in your arm, but if you have your baby in one arm and your phone in the other, and you're looking at the phone, then that baby isn't getting that real close face-to-face connection that they need to learn and develop. And that is how a baby learns and develops, through feedback from their primary caregiver at that really close distance, because they can't see beyond that.
Touch and expression and everything.
Absolutely. And so if their caregiver isn't looking at them or is looking at a phone, then they're just not getting that feedback.
So it sounds like research is exploding in this area because of the different types of concerns that are coming up around it.
Absolutely. And Fergal, there's a very interesting experiment called the still face experiment. Now, this dates back to the 1970s with Ed Tronick, an American psychologist. But it's literally a 2-minute lab experiment where you've got a little infant and a parent, and they're playing and interacting. The mom looks away and looks back with literally a still face. And the little baby, is looking out, kind of pulling at the mom's attention, and mom gives nothing back. Very quickly, the child gets so distressed, it body arches, it's crying, it's very emotionally distressed. The mother looks back again and engages with the child, and the child very quickly soothes and gets back to that kind of euthymic goodness that is happening in their relationship. So in that 2 minutes, it just goes to show what a still face can cause in a child's inner state. And this is kind of used in the technoference research as an example of when we're totally absorbed in technology, we are not engaging with the people around us. And that is very distressing in terms of our human relationships.
Yeah, it's funny when you mentioned that expression back to a child. We're all taught automatically that when you see a child looking at you, you give them a smile, or you give them, I see, a child looking at you in the shop, behind the mother, and they're looking up to see what kind of warm expression you're going to give them, but they expect that. That's interesting. That's really sad that, that's an absolute need. We kind of take it for granted.
And in developmental psychology, we call it the serve and return.
Yeah.
So literally, a child has to be smiled at to know how to smile. A child has to be spoken to, has to be played with in order to know how to play. So these serve and return human interactions are actually gold in terms of our development.
Yeah, we don't even realize the child. We're teaching and learning ourselves. In terms of content, like we said, content matters. How can we engage with our children on the content that they're looking at?
Some research suggests that a parent, like if you put the device as the apex of a triangle with parent and child, then if you can interact, ask questions, what do you see here, or what's going on, or tell me about that, or who's that unicorn and what's their magic power, then we're kind of engaging with the young person.
And it's like a story.
It's like a story. So that can change the impact of the device on the child. And, I think there is research that shows that can have some kind of positive impact on language acquisition. But there's oftentimes apps are advertised as being educational or, improving IQ. There's no research for that. That's just something that's a kind of an advertising gimmick. So again, it's kind of...
maybe designed to take a bit of guilt from the parents for the increased screen time.
Yeah, maybe. But just be wise to that.
Yeah.
These things, there's no research, but certainly we can sit down and enjoy something and be playful and engage with TV shows or games with children.
And I guess if you think about how we've evolved, we are wired for social interaction. And that metaphor that we mentioned earlier, serve and return, those interactions are, at the seat of development, social, emotional and cognitive development. And there's a lovely one, I was thinking about the playground the other day, and I saw a parent having earphones on as they were pushing their child on the swing. And actually, if you think about if that person didn't have headphones on, what's your natural thing you do when a child is on a swing? You go, wee, wee. And if we look at what's happening cognitively and socially emotionally for that child, there's vestibular brain activity. And with that is the motor coordination, it's your language learning centers. So Mother Nature provides parents, mothers and fathers with these opportunities to accentuate the development of their children. We on a swing, you're not even realizing you're doing it, but all the time you're accelerating the learning of this child. You pop headphones on and your attention is brought immediately away from this vital development you're providing your child, even on a swing in a playground.
That's a beautiful example, yeah. And really what I'm picking out from there, that term you use there, social and emotional development, that seems to be key. It comes up for us a lot in terms of our mental well-being work and a real priority focus for children. So we're talking about this technoference can have a massive impact on that.
Yeah, it can have a massive impact on, every area of a child's development, from kind of physical development. So when we're thinking about like eye health, ear health, how physically active, how physically fit they are, through to their kind of emotional well-being and their cognitive development. And we'll talk a bit more about that as we go on. One thing I would like to say before it is a lot of this research is very new. Right. The sample sizes are small, so it's hard to be really definitive about it. But what we do know is that across the world now, scientists, researchers, academics, governments are beginning to take note and to think, we need to actually do something about this. And really interestingly, now some of the tech companies are also taking note and beginning to make changes. So, I think for me, as someone who's reading the research and then seeing this sort of domino effect, I'm kind of thinking, right, so even though these are small samples, so we have to kind of use our own judgment when we're thinking about the research, but also people who work in this area are now making changes and saying, yeah, we do need to protect young people. There's a big advertisement campaign at the moment from some of the tech companies about letting parents know that they have toolkits on their platforms to kind of protect children.
So it's all moving in the one direction, but it's highlighting the concerns that we're talking about today.
Yeah.
Do you think screen time increased massively with COVID and the lockdown and our... we're talking about parent screen time as well as the children's screen time. But my sense of it, and maybe that's I feel a bit guilty of it, but my screen time absolutely increased during COVID. And I know there was nearly like forgiveness for youth screen time at that time. Tell me that I'm not abnormal in that context.
Yeah, well, I definitely think anecdotally that's what you hear, and it's what the research shows as well. And, certainly education moved online, didn't it, for a period of time. And
so school was screen time.
School was screen time. And, I think teachers did really well to try and engage kids. And one of the things we do know is that, for example, if you're doing a video call with someone, that's okay, because if the child is interacting with the screen in that way, because they're seeing the face, they're doing. And
that was so essential with lockdown as well. There was even people in the same country were dependent completely on Zoom and your WhatsApp and all the rest of it.
It allowed relationships to be maintained, didn't it? So that was about fostering connection and relationships. And I know there's probably grandparents and aunties and uncles and people across the country who wouldn't have had time to interact or build that relationship with children had we not had screens. So they were really vital. And, I'm sure people across the world, maybe in Australia or America, it really benefited relationships.
My sense is we haven't said, okay, that normal needs to be, we need to come back to a new normal. And when the new normal now is a bit more acceptance of that increased screen time. And that's not a healthy addition to us going forward, I guess.
So it's how do we accommodate the benefits while being aware of the costs, isn't it? When you bring it down to the kind of brass tacks of it. So
what would healthy screen time look like? We've said we kind of have to accept it. We've kind of accepted that, as you said, this is reality, can have a benefit to us. But what would healthy screen time look like in terms of your work and the advice the HSE has given out here today?
Well, as all psychologists would say, that depends, Fergal. But I would recommend looking at the HSE page, Screen Time and Young People, that we have developed with the HSE. In there, it goes through looking at the stage of development of a child. So what does a 0 to 18-month-old need? What do children, as they go through their stages of development, need? And we would say that all of these conversations need to happen in the context of relationships. So it's about family agreements. It's about negotiation. It's about looking at the nuance of the benefits of gaming. Gaming is a play-based activity. It's creative. There's risk-taking. It can expand your creativity repertoire. And also, you have to have conversations around, is it interrupting sleep?
Yeah.
What is the blue light? What kind of downtime is your child having? Is your child able to regulate the transition from being gaming to being off gaming? So we really are inviting families to have agreements, to have conversations, and to engage with. Just like Jillian was saying, not all devices are negative in terms of those video calls. That's an interactive family experience when you're calling an aunt in Australia, for example.
Devices encourage us to be passive. So we can very easily get sucked in and locked in.
Yeah.
And so what Amory is talking about here is, rather than doing that mindlessly, do it mindfully. So, that we start with ourselves. And, most devices now you can check, as Amory said, how often you're on them. So what's my own use?
Yeah.
What's it impacting? How am I using it? Am I using it to regulate myself? And then you expand that conversation. What are the kids using? When are they using it? Why are they using it? Are we as a family using devices to help our kids regulate? And does that need to change? So what are the behaviours that aren't serving us, and what are the behaviours that are serving us? That being said, with smaller children, less is better.
Okay.
So, and I think all the recommendations are saying that. And the other thing to know is that devices in the background count. So if
in the background of,
so if there's a TV on, for example,
and life is happening around it.
Life is happening around
Okay.
it. And I think again, if we mindfully think about that, if anyone has been in a room with a device, even if it's on in the background, your eye is drawn to it. That's the nature of how these, the colours attract the human eye. So small children are no different. So that counts as screen time. So it's important just to think about that.
Yeah.
And what are the times when in your house there is no device on?
Yeah, we have to scratch your head there.
Yeah.
I really like the piece around the conversation, because this does seem to be a process. You just said there, Jillian, about, you need to reflect on this yourself before you go socializing or laying ground rules or trying to have the conversation. A couple of our podcasts in terms of healthy child development in relation to, I remember our discussion around relationships and sexual health, that was all about prioritizing the conversation with children at different ages. This seems to be one of those, it's a healthy thing to do, to talk to your kids, obviously, but this is a tough subject. It may be a tough nut to crack, so we need to do that personal reflection and then bring it to the family members. And I love the way you said, look, when do we not have a screen on here? That could be a point of discussion to start with. And when, as you said, when are we being overly passive? Isn't that the term? Or?
Yeah. And I think the other thing about these conversations is they have to be dynamic. So one of the things we know is that children change all the time. And anyone who's a parent of a young child will know, as soon as you have a grip on one stage, they're going to change. Yeah. So the conversation needs to evolve. And, I think children are becoming aware of devices at an earlier and earlier age. They might be feeling pressure to have a device. And it's important as parents that you're able to reflect on what their needs are, what the family's needs are. And so that you don't just kind of give in because they say, well, everyone has this, where,
Yeah, that's certainly been an issue now for some parents that I know really well. Like, the children feel pressurized to get the device. And feel left out when they don't have the device because they're out of a Snapchat group or out of the loop. And sometimes these can be kind of supportive groups, and you're kind of worried about, you have no eyesight of that, and you're kind of concerned about that. But that pulling into the device, early teens is a concern.
And I think it's Fergal, it's so interesting. If you flip that right around, that argument, the question is, are your kids missing out by having these devices? Are you missing out on opportunities to be more aware of your inner state, how you regulate, how you kind of manage a highly anxious situation? Are you missing out on opportunities for play, for reading to your child if you've got a Tony box in the room doing the stories for you? You miss out on your child asking questions, wondering about, that's what I think is so interesting about like adolescence and the rituals of this time of development. Are kids missing out by being so reliant on an external device and not having these vital opportunities around this moratorium of change as they, reach into young adulthood?
Yeah. You're highlighting loads of good parenting advice there.
Yeah.
And it comes back to that piece that we're talking about you talk about this. You need to talk about anything or everything. And if you don't have that talking space, you don't have anything. You don't have a relationship.
And that's it. I mean, the talking space embedded in that is trust, isn't it? It's about honouring and respecting, that there's two sides, honouring that the algorithms of these devices can pull you in ways that you lose your own kind of self-control. And you bring that as an adult awareness, you bring that as a child awareness. I guess awareness is key to bring a curiosity around what changes need to be made to your device use.
So I want to go back to the different age range recommendations. Now, you gave us the message there, Jillian, about that video call is kind of like, we accept that. That's a good thing. There's human being talking to each other, communicating, sharing. You can see the human expression and all the rest of it. That has that. But what age range were you saying that, they shouldn't have screens, shouldn't be given, phones to children of any... Well, what age range should we be concerned about there?
Again, I know, and Anne-Marie has already said this, it depends. We're psychologists. Each child is unique. Each family is unique. There are kind of broad stroke guidelines. I think a phone, having a personal computer in your pocket, the world at your fingertips, that's a big decision, I think, to make. And so the different things that a parent might reflect on is, what is my child's capacity to problem solve? What is their capacity to make thoughtful decisions? Can they reason things out? Do they have logic? Can I trust them? And in what way? Can I trust them to say no if they come across something that they know they're not supposed to be looking at? What are the conversations I've had with them about personal safety? So I think that decision to have a phone is a big one. And, I'm also very aware that some families maybe feel they don't have a choice but to give a child a phone at an early age.
There's certainly pressure there, but I think what you're highlighting is good there, that a safety conversation is definitely the start point, isn't it?
Yeah. And I think in this country, if we move kind of to social media, the suggested age for a child to go onto social media is 16 or 13 with parental guidance. But, I think there is research showing that within minutes of opening a social media account, inappropriate content begins to filter into a child's phone. So prior to taking that step, which is obviously a step beyond device use, it's important that certain conversations have been had so that a child is feeling kind of safe and secure within themselves and who they are, so they have some sense of themselves.
Yeah. So much comes back to esteem, self-esteem and good mental health. Go back to that social and emotional development that we talked about earlier on, that we're trying to instill these things in our children so they can stand up for themselves, or they can... they can see the world for what it is, the good, the bad, and the beautiful,
Social emotional development is, the biggest predictor of school readiness in, the age 5 group of children. And if we're thinking, say, if you look at the World Health Organization guidelines, they will say young babies should have 0 screen time. But in culture and society, there's young Einstein programs on devices, and parents are kind of fed this knowledge that actually device use is good for infants. And I think we just need to challenge some of the sales speak that people are getting and parents are getting about the importance of device use, and just a cautionary tale on it might impact the social emotional development of our children.
So when you talk about like the age ranges that you've got the guidance for. Under 18 months, we shouldn't have a screen unless that you're talking to your auntie and uncle or whatever.
Yeah, no, there's no need. There's no need for a child to be on a screen. At that age, a child will get everything they need from the people around them. That is the best learning, and from the people around them kind of filtering the world. Like if you think of a caregiver, whoever that person may be, the child, the small child, and the world as the third party. So if you can talk and narrate the world to the child and you're doing that together, then that's exactly what they need. They don't need a device.
Okay. And for other ages of primary school children, or as children getting older, they're going to be looking at cartoons, they're going to be looking for screen time, be it or a game, or what's our advice with them?
Again, we would caution having a prescriptive, X equals Y, but certainly for the under sixes, no more than an hour. And after that, it is in negotiation. And, Fergal, you'll probably find it yourself, like the more you negotiate, the more children feel like their voice is heard, the more they'll find the middle ground for you to find a happy medium in your family. I mean, devices, it isn't easy. I mean, we're all parents in this room and we've fought that good fight, but it is about finding that middle ground and, reviewing it. Just like Jillian said, you're at the stage of your child's development where you think you have it, they move on. And it's the same with devices. Their device use becomes even more complex. It becomes more specific, when you move into territory where your children are having social connections through gaming, that's another nuanced conversation to have.
So much in this, isn't it?
So much in it.
You could have a podcast series about screen time.
Yeah,
absolutely.
So you're staying there an hour for up to sixes. Is that what you said?
Yes.
The recommendation. And as you keep repeating, it's context, relationship, talking. So over sixes, what are we looking at there? Is there just an expansion of that time and all re-emphasizing that talking and discussion all the time?
Yeah, I think that's where it becomes very nuanced and child and family specific.
Right.
So for example, if we're saying under 6, not more than an hour, you have to think you're not suddenly going to jump to, 4 hours. It has to be, in accordance with the child's needs. And, I think if as parents we can prioritize other needs, like is our child getting outside? Are they getting fresh air? Are they getting play? Are they being bored? And it's that constant, Mom, I'm bored. And yeah, that's great. Off you go and figure out something to do. As adults, I think sometimes we feel pressure to solve everything for children, but actually that's part of their development. And you'll see kids, they have great ingenuity. They'll figure things out. They'll do something really creative, but they have to be given space to do that. And so maybe screens come after all of those other tasks have been met.
Yeah.
And, I was thinking this morning, it would be lovely if we had, sometimes when we think about healthy eating, we think about that 80-20 rule. If we could have something like that in terms of screen time. So, 80% of the time we're meeting all of our other needs. And then that shorter period of time is a time where you can use devices. And, I 100% feel that devices are really helpful at times for people with small kids, people with bigger kids. There's tasks that need to be done.
Yeah.
But it's really important that devices don't take precedence over the other really important developmental tasks that children have to accomplish.
Yeah, that's really the overall message of today's episode, isn't it? Like, these are useful, we accept these are part of our life, but if we're sleepwalking around this issue and we're parenting around this issue, we're not really getting our teeth stuck into it, we'll miss a lot of what we need to consider here.
Yeah.
And the value of having those conversations and building our relationship, using this as another challenge in the parenting. Like, this is definitely every parent I speak to has a kind of concern about this.
Yeah, and research is now showing it's one of the top healthcare concerns among parents. And research is now suggesting that teenagers are saying we're on screens too much.
Wow.
So they themselves are beginning to recognize that this is an issue for them. And, I think Loneliness is high in Ireland. Growing Up in Ireland survey recently showed that 13 and 14-year-olds are feeling more anxious and having more low moods than ever before. So it's really important that their capacity to form relationships is developed in the real world, so that they're feeling, if they go into a room, that they can sit down and say hello to someone, and rather than sit down and go on the phone.
And what you don't want young people doing is shutting down to manage, and devices can literally shut down your emotional regulation. And you need to experience, dysregulation to find how you regulate yourself. So this
coping skills.
These are the coping skills, essential coping skills.
Yeah. You're saying so much truths there in terms of my own reality with my children, that I suppose what you're saying there, you have to let them live and not on a screen. And I love what you said there about being able to go into a room and talk to somebody. Because sometimes I think like social media is great, but it's nearly antisocial from what social was supposed to mean. When I was growing up, it was like engaging. You're going to a social, or you're meeting people and haven't been able to have a conversation. As you said there, Jillian, we need to be able to live in the real world.
And even for you, Fergal, like, as parents as well, when we're sitting around the kitchen table and you pick up your phone, do you say to your kids, oh, I'm just going to answer Uncle Johnny here who's on the phone, or, explaining what your use is and the functionality of your use. So you're keeping the conversations live. Your attention isn't being drawn away without people knowing what it is you're doing. Are you having, a screen-free time around dinner, for example? These essential, rest and digest times with your family. Are they really enjoyable times to have those conversations rather than being drawn away somewhere else?
Yeah, we had to purposely do that a few times, and using even a television program or a film and letting different people pick, but no screens allowed other than the bloody screen that we're looking at. But then that becomes something to engage about. I had a lovely experience with one of my children where I got invited him in to look at one of the old Planet of the Apes movies that were made in the 70s. And I thought he might like these, but he really, really liked it. And then, he went off and looked at another one on his own and came back and wanted to look at another one with me. But like, it was like a different type of screen time, which we don't always succeed on. I feel like I have loads of improvements to make on screen time in my house, or we have. But I found like you can use a screen sometimes, like a television or a movie there, to be engaging or be part of that relationship building. So it's not always unhealthy, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know recently in our house, I have a 3 and a 5-year-old, we all sat down to watch the Irish athletes in the European Championships. And it was lovely. And we were, all kind of singing and shouting at the screen. And then we've kind of been speaking about them since. And we've had sports days and, things like that. And using, again, a screen, but as a platform to talk about something else.
And find mutual joy. And I guess our big message in all of this, Fergal, is about the good enough. What's good enough. And, we talk about it in terms of parenting, we talk about it in terms of children's use, but it's finding that happy medium.
Yeah. No, I think that's healthy.
Yeah.
So all that information that we're talking about here is on the HSE website under Screen Time and Young Children, which is under the mychild.ie program. We're very happy to be working with the Healthy Childhood program today in partnership on this episode. So I just want to go back to some of the key kind of messages that I picked out, and I saw you have a great video on that website as well, and it really highlights some of the things that we've been talking about, that age matters, that there's different content and screen time, and you've kind of highlighted that for the very young baby, that, the growing child in the primary school age, and they're coming to expect that challenge around, I want my own screen, and what we need to think about around that. But content matters. You mentioned safety, Jillian.
Yes, absolutely.
And that content theme, I guess, that doesn't get any easier as the teen age rises,
No, absolutely not. And again, it's something, it's one of these new challenges that parents and their young people have to manage together. What is the content coming in? And when it's something that isn't suitable, does this young person know to walk away?
Yeah.
And can they say it to an adult and feel safe in doing that? And I think that's really, really important nowadays, because there's just, lots of different type of content that can be really dysregulating for a young person to see, and they need to be able to digest that. And that's one of the tasks of a parent, to help a young person digest things that they don't understand.
Yeah. The amount matters. So we've age matters, content matters, the amount matters. And we talked about screen time. One of the issues that you mentioned earlier on, Anne-Marie, that I'd like to ask you about, and I know it's a concern for some parents, they tell me that, they're giving their child screen time in a game or something like that. And then they say, okay, your time is up. And their behavior over that 5 or 10 minutes, becomes it's like you're after pulling the seat from out under them, and they're after crashing to the floor. There is an
emotional reactivity that can happen, and for
it helps, I guess, when they know it's coming, but still there's an end to it.
Absolutely. And those kind of boundaries are important, but how do you bring around that boundary? Is there a transition period? Do you literally have...
Like a warning time, you have 5 minutes left or 10 minutes left?
And I guess if you use warning language, it can create a threat and danger in the child's mind. So again, how do you negotiate it? Can you go out together and buy a big egg timer, a giant egg timer with 5 minutes, signaling a transition time?
Yeah.
So again, it's kind of the positive language around it. It's flipping, again, the conversations towards, well, you're going to have opportunities for, this other activity.
Right.
But those transitions leading to, for a child to be able to anticipate this too will end. And again, those family agreements that you have will be all important, that this isn't coming out of the blue.
Yeah. We have an agreement around this. We said...
I had my voice, you had your voice. So again, in that negotiation is all important. But some kids, they'll need a little bit more, after they've been on a game. They might need more down regulation tools. They might need some kind of coping and skill-based activity to help. There's lots of kind of sensory toys. Some people might need just a quick run around outside. What does a little person or a big person's nervous system need to down regulate? And again, that will depend on the individual, what they'll need.
Yeah, but there's great tips there. Thanks to a million for sharing them. I think they will definitely help. So we're just going through the priorities now. Age matters, content matters, the amount matters, background screens have an impact. That's one thing that you called out, Jillian, that maybe we forget that, or we don't.
Absolutely,
we don't count it in. It has that distracting element, and it takes away from what we're trying to do, have a relationship, talk to people.
Yeah.
Okay, there's another one here that you've kind of touched on it in part, but play is powerful. And you just mentioned there is like a coming away from your screen, getting involved in physical play or doing something. But you also mentioned it in terms of child development.
Well, it's how children learn. They learn through play. And I think now we can even see in the curriculum, it's moved much more towards a play-based sort of curriculum. But it's so important for children to play. And it's so important for children to have sort of spontaneous play and risky play. And, I think if we think back to maybe 15, 20 years ago, children were kind of out and about a bit more, climbing walls, climbing trees, calling into the kids down the road. And the way society has gone, that's harder now.
Less opportunities to jump in muddy puddles.
There absolutely are, yeah. And it is important that we create those opportunities for our children and allow them engage in that sort of play. And if I watch my children, I can be guaranteed that within 5 minutes they're going to be doing something that's potentially going to, cause damage to the thing they're playing with or to themselves. And that's the way kids are. But that's how they learn limits. That's how they learn to be safe. And it's important that they're given that opportunity.
And opportunities as well to fail. I guess we're in a society which is very perfectionistic in our tendencies, but allowing children to try out risky play, to fall off a tree, whatever it is, that actually is learning. That's a growth experience for development of young people.
Yeah. I've seen so many children, like there's a trend now around making slime. Did you see this?
Mm.
And it's one of those messy plays. And even through COVID, I've seen a lot more children get involved in the likes of baking, which has got these it can be a messy task, but it's really pro-social. And as you said, like it doesn't have to be bloody perfect either. But like if you're doing that with a grown-up or somebody helping you, like that's just a beautiful experience. You're not going to even forget.
And, again, when I was thinking about this podcast, I was thinking about, 20 years ago, oftentimes that phrase, children should be seen and not heard, was used. And, I think if you asked people nowadays, oh, is that still the case? People would say, no, it's not.
Yeah.
But actually, a lot of the time, children nowadays are seen and not heard because they're on devices. And so as a society, we probably need to tolerate children being children more. So when you're in a restaurant, it's okay for a child to be kind of running around or talking or being loud or whining, which I think has a special effect on the adult ear. But that's just kids being kids. And I think as a society, perhaps we need to be more tolerant of children being children, that it's all right, they're going to have meltdowns, and that parents then don't feel ashamed or guilty if their child is the child who's out and about just being a child.
Because again, if your child doesn't melt down, they don't learn how to repair that. So again, they need these experiences to really develop socially and emotionally.
Any experienced parent, I suppose, worth their salt, has been through that meltdown experience. And when you see it in the shopping centre, you just feel your heart goes out to that parent.
Thanks, it's not me.
You're delighted it's not you that day. But if you've been in that experience, you've maybe been in a flop sweat and you just go, oh my God, this day, and your child is just absolutely lifting out of it, or they're just not cooperating with you. But as you said, there's growth in that. I love that.
And there's growth for the child, but of course there's growth for the parent as well, to be able to tolerate the distress of your little one showing you off or doing their thing. That's a growth experience for a parent. And of course, as your child ages into adolescence, your heart is literally in your mouth, waiting for them to come home, waiting for, to hear them on the phone, that they send a text saying, I'm all right, I'm safe, whatever it is, So I think there's growth for both the parent and child to tolerate these experiences.
So the next priority I want to highlight here is screen-free time. So they're a healthy thing to do.
Absolutely. And, there are recommendations now that you would have screen-free days. And that just gives people an opportunity to do something else that the child isn't either working towards using their screen or regulating coming off of it.
Cutting out the technoference. And again, if you think about that 8 to 10 inches away from your face, removing that distraction, of course, you're inviting in the world. What else is there in the world to take notice of, whether it's within your relationship, whether it's something around you. Only yesterday we were out in our back garden and I was like, where is that bird? And we were looking around for the bird singing, but if you don't have those opportunities, you don't get to see, well, who are the birds in my back garden, for example, No, that's a simple, good example. And the last priority shout out here is around parents modelling, so let's give some, as we kind of finish up this podcast, let's give a bit of encouragement to the parents here in a positive way, because we don't like parents are sucked into this vortex as well, isn't it?
Absolutely. I think, again, we've kind of come full circle here. The first step is about developing an awareness of your own screen use and how you use it. And sometimes I think a screen or screen times for parents can replace taking a break, because there's this sense of, I can't be seen to take a break. But actually, it might be really nice for a parent to say, I'm just going to take 15 minutes here, or, I have my tennis lesson tonight, or you have your piano, or whatever it is that you're actually modeling then putting down your screen and living a life that's full, or I'm going for a walk with my friend. And so then your kids can say to you, oh, who's your friend? Who are you meeting? And, that's such and such, mommy. And so that's all kind of, modeling really nice, healthy behaviors. As Anne-Marie says, at certain times, maybe like the dinner, putting the phone down, just giving your full attention, or, sitting and watching a TV without having a screen in your hand at the same time, because so many of us are kind of half watching the TV and half on the phone. And your poor brain then is trying to do, so many different things. And, the adult brain needs rest as well. And I also think, just as I say that, I'm thinking about sleep, to give yourself time to down regulate in the evenings, so that you're not kind of in bed on your phone, because that disrupts, good sleep.
And I mean, if you're saying to your adolescent not to use a device to relax, you want to be sure that you're modeling that best practice yourself. Can you leave the phone at the door? Can you ziplock it? And actually research is showing, Miriam McCaleb in New Zealand, people are actually having to physically remove themselves from their phone because our attachment is such, because of the algorithms are so sensitive to, our needs and the function of these phones.
Those dopamine hits.
Getting these dopamine hits, the habits, the all-consuming nature of what these devices can provide. We literally have to leave them aside, give ourselves distance from them to be able to move away. So how powerful for our children to be able to see us modeling that.
Yeah, that's a great message to finish on, I think. Okay, so I just want to thank you, sincerely for coming in today. It's great to have psychologists on to bring us through this kind of, as we said, there's so much content in this. And I know that you've both been a part of this special interest group in perinatal and infant mental health. Do you want to tell us a bit about that? You're working with other psychologists on that?
We are a special interest group at the Psychological Society of Ireland, which is a 5,000 member group in Ireland. Our interest is in perinatal and infant mental health. It's advocating for the populations, and it's looking at the period of pre-pregnancy, transition to becoming a parent, and the first 3 years of a little infant's life as the dyad and the caregiving kind of village.
So they're really, really precious moments, aren't they?
And really, really important moments. So, we can think of that period of a person's life as the bedrock of what is to come for the rest of your life. So human beings are born with so much potential, so much opportunity to develop in every single way, we can imagine. And that is the foundation, that time in a human being's life. It's the time they kind of pour the foundation for what's to come.
So there might be other topics. We may have you back on the podcast in the future. Thank you so much for coming and sharing your insights today. And I'd like to thank the Healthy Childhood Programme in particular for the support and input into this episode. And I'd like to also signpost you back to the Screen Time and Young Children page on the hse.ie website, where a lot of this information is laid out. And I'd really appreciate, you taking that time to have a look at that and sharing this podcast with anyone you think shares your concerns around screen time. And finally, I'd like to thank you, the listener, for tuning in to another episode of the HSE Talking Health and Wellbeing podcast.